In 1870, a German amateur named Heinrich Schliemann started digging into a hill in northwestern Turkey. He was looking for a city that everyone in the academic world had spent 2,000 years dismissing as fiction. He found a burn layer 3 feet thick. Homer's Trojan War was real. The question was always which layer and when. Around 800 BC, a Greek poet named Homer told a story about a war. 10 years of siege, a wooden horse, 1,000 ships. The Iliad was memorized, recited, and finally written down. For 2,800 years it stayed in circulation. The setting, Troy, a wealthy Bronze Age city on the northwest coast of what is now Turkey. The attackers, a coalition of Mycenaean Greek kings led by Agamemnon. The date Homer implied, around 1180 BC. The war ended when the Greeks pretended to leave and left behind a wooden horse full of soldiers. Or so the story went. For most of history, everyone assumed it was myth. For centuries, scholars debated whether Homer himself was even a single person. In the 1930s, a young American classicist named Milman Parry recorded illiterate Serbian singers reciting hours-long oral epics from memory. He proved that Homer was the last great voice of a much older oral tradition that had been passing the Iliad down for centuries before it was written, which meant the story might carry real historical memory much older than 800 BC. 19th century historians in particular treated the Iliad as pure literature. There was no Troy, there was no Priam, there was no 10-year war. Homer had invented it. Then a 9-year-old boy in Germany read the Iliad and decided he would find Troy. That boy was Heinrich Schliemann. He became a millionaire in the California gold rush, retired at 40 and moved to Turkey to hunt for a fictional city. Homer had given rough geography, near the Hellespont, near 2 rivers, near a windy plain. Schliemann matched it to a large mound called hillside. He started digging in 1870. He hit not 1 city, but 9. 9 cities built on top of each other, each new one on the ruins of the last, stacked 40 meters deep. He was so eager to find Homer's Troy that he dug straight through the correct layer, deep into a much older city underneath. He announced he had found Priam's treasure. He hadn't. It was 1,000 years too old. It took another 130 years to get the answer right. Between Schliemann and Kaufmann, an American archaeologist named Carl Blegen excavated hillside in the 1930s. Blegen was the first to systematically number the 9 layers. He argued that layer 7, not layer 2, was Homer's Troy. It took another 50 years and modern radiocarbon dating to prove him right. In 1988, the German archaeologist Manfred Kaufmann restarted work at hillside with modern tools. Ground-penetrating radar, geophysical surveys, careful stratigraphy. Of the 9 cities, Troy 7A was destroyed by fire around 1180 BC. The exact date Homer implied. The city walls were burned, the palaces collapsed, the population fled or died in the fire. Then archaeologists went to the Hittite archives. The Hittites in central Anatolia were the great Bronze Age superpower of the region. They kept meticulous diplomatic records on clay tablets. In those records, they mentioned a place they called Wilusa. Modern linguists have shown that Wilusa is the same word as Ilios, the Greek name for Troy. The Hittites signed a treaty with a king of Wilusa named Alaksandu around 1280 BC. Alaksandu is the same name as Alexandros, Homer's other name for Paris, Prince of Troy. The Hittite records also describe a mysterious western enemy called the Ahiyawa, the Achaeans, Homer's Greeks. Meanwhile, at the site itself, archaeologists were finding the physical evidence of a war. Skeletons buried in shallow graves with sword cuts and arrow wounds. Bronze arrowheads embedded in the city walls. Sling stones scattered by the hundreds in the streets. And Troy was much bigger than Schliemann had thought. He had only found the citadel, the small stone royal quarter at the top of the hill. Ground-penetrating radar in the 1990s revealed a lower city 10 times larger, sprawling across the plain below. Bronze Age Troy was a walled city of 5,000 people, with an outer defensive ditch and mud brick fortifications. A serious target for a serious army. So the war happened, which leaves the wooden horse. This is where historians still divide. 3 theories. First, the horse is metaphor for a real siege engine, a battering ram, or a covered wooden approach shed. Second, it is metaphor for an earthquake. Troy sits on the North Anatolian fault line, one of the most seismically active zones in the world. In Greek mythology, Poseidon is both the god of the sea and the god of earthquakes. The horse was sacred to Poseidon. A city gate collapsing at night from an earthquake and letting the Greek army in. That fits the geology, and it fits the metaphor. Third, the horse is literal, a war trick, exactly as Homer described. We do not know. Homer is the only source. But everything else Homer told us checks out. A wealthy Bronze Age city on the Turkish coast, a war around 1180 BC, a great fire that ended it. Modern linguists have found that Homer's Greek contains fossilized Mycenaean vocabulary, words that dropped out of use after 1200 BC. The Iliad describes a boar's tusk helmet, a distinctive Bronze Age armor piece that had not been made in Homer's own lifetime. Homer was singing about a world he could not have known unless the memory of it had been preserved word by word for 400 years. A Greek attacking force, a Trojan king with a son named Alexander, and diplomatic records from the neighboring superpower confirming both. Troy did not burn alone. Its destruction sits inside the Bronze Age collapse, the 50-year window when Mycenae, the Hittites, Ugarit, and Troy all fell together. Homer's Trojan War may have been one specific fire inside a much larger inferno. You can visit the ruins today. They are open to the public. You can stand on the same stones that a Bronze Age Trojan warrior stood on the night his city burned. The lower city has been mapped. The Hittite tablets are catalogued. The date is confirmed. For 2,800 years, people thought the Iliad was a story. The Iliad was memorized, recited, translated, and printed in every language that ever had a printing press. Homer's story outlived every empire that ever laid siege to Troy. It turns out it was reporting. There was a Troy. There was a war. There was a king named Alexander who signed a treaty with the Hittites. The wooden horse remains open. Alexander the Great stopped at Troy in 334 BC on his way to conquer Persia. He laid a wreath at what he believed was Achilles' tomb and slept with the Iliad under his pillow. The Romans built a shrine there. Emperor Caracalla visited. So did Julian the Apostate. For 1,200 years, every ambitious ruler in the Mediterranean stopped by Troy to be photographed at it. But everything else Homer said really happened.